Sometimes I get a little concerned around Bitcoin getting ahead of its skis. Other times I get a little concerned around gold getting ahead of its skis. Right now, I mean, gold, just by more metrics, is kind of sentiment overbought. Even though I still think the long-term case for it is good. But I mean, over the next 6-12 months, I put my vote for Bitcoin.
Hello everyone, this is BTC Insight and welcome to yet another deep dive into BTC Insight. Before we jump in, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't yet. You won't want to miss this.
Shifting gears, Alden explores gold's enduring role in the monetary system. She notes that the U.S. government still carries gold on its books at outdated prices from decades ago. If the Federal Reserve were to reprice gold to today's market levels, or even higher, it could unlock massive liquidity without issuing new debt. Here's how. By marking gold reserves up to a modern value, the Treasury's account would automatically be credited. This could allow the government to spend without borrowing, effectively devaluing the dollar against gold. Of course, this isn't free money. It's a form of default, not in nominal terms, but in purchasing power. Holders of dollars and bonds would effectively pay the price through devaluation. Alden compares this to what happened after World War II, where governments used inflation as a stealth tax to reduce debt burdens.
If an entity just replaces some of its own deposits with stablecoin or stablecoin-like things, that's not the same thing as basically having stablecoin, issuing it, and collecting a lot of new AUM, a lot of new assets under management because your stablecoin has taken off. And it's kind of, it goes back to the whole point of what money is and why stablecoins, at least kind of currently work as money or money-like assets, is because there's not that many of them. When people, potentially want to pay in stablecoins, like instead of saying which of the 37 stablecoins are we going to pick from, it's kind of known which one or two you're going to use. And so it's kind of synonymous with the thing that it's underlying the dollar. So I do think that we'll see somewhat of a scramble for kind of stablecoin participation. But ultimately, I think that monetary network effects settle closer to one. Now, with technology, swaps can make things super easily. So like you can always kind of just exchange things on the fly when you have to, if like the buyer and the seller have, say, different, one has a certain stable coin and someone else has a different stable coin. There are solutions for that. But then the question is, is the thing you're building now, is it more complicated than the thing you're replacing? Because the whole point is to compress overhead, make things more efficient. That's what makes people want to use it, or that it gets them dollars, whereas before they couldn't even potentially get dollars, or even better than dollars, like basically a bank account, like an offshore bank account. Basically, I think the phrasing that just clicks a lot is stablecoins are offshore bank accounts for the middle class and working class globally. So offshore, it used to be that if you were in a country that didn't have a great currency and you wanted something, that's either out of the reach of your government to some extent, or you wanted something that's more protected from inflation, one of your options is offshore bank account in dollars. But with the overhead and having a bank account in another country, they're obviously only going to cater to you if you're quite wealthy. And stablecoins basically use technology to suppress, narrow that overhead cost to very low, which then makes it available to anyone with basically a smartphone in the world. And I think that's part of the demand. But then internally, where it can help, especially cross-border, so anything that involves, like I mentioned before, any sort of international wire transfers, that's a very kind of outdated system. It's ripe for faster, more transparent, and cheaper international sending. Even a lot of fintech stuff is just overlays on top of the correspondent banking system, and stablecoins kind of just go around that. So there is demand for it, but I tend to think, it's more, I had to put my venture hat on to see demand there, whereas when I put my macro hat on, I'm mostly looking at things like $1 trillion and up, right? So that what can impact kind of global macro flows, that's the range that things have to reach. So I kind of view this whole stablecoin dynamic as more venture-like opportunities than something that kind of changes my high-level macro thesis on anything. Individuals can have plans, but are there enough individuals together that have a collective plan? My guess would be no, but the individuals do. As far as using gold to do it, I mean, there is a on the books mechanism to do this. It's not like you'd have to think it up. It's already there in like the Fed operating handbook, which is basically that they can reprice gold And by doing so, they basically get credited in the Treasury General account with the amount of the increase. There's a couple more details than that, but that's basically, it's one of the very few mechanisms the government can do under current law where they can spend without issuing debt. But it instead involves, it's a type of default in a way. You're devaluing the dollar relative to gold.
Yeah.
Now, there is a little bit of a free lunch currently, or kind of more like an untapped check there, which is that if they only devalue the dollar relative to gold to current market prices, because they have it on the books back in like 1970s prices.
40 something an ounce.
Yeah, something like that. So if they were to reprice it to current levels, that's just kind of reflecting an untapped thing that they still have. The optics would be questionable at that point. Like the whole point, a lot of these, it's dollar included, a lot of this is based on confidence. So it would maybe it would get people talking, but that could make some degree of mechanical sense. Now they technically could reprice it higher than the current level. You could use that approach to price gold higher.
They could just pick a price like 5,000 an ounce.
Yeah, they can pick other numbers, but they have a cost, which is so they would then fill the TG up. They'd be able to spend without issuing debt. It would look kind of like QE at a pretty big scale. But it would even look more than that. It would look like, potentially fiscal combined with QE, depending on what they decided to do with that money. It'd be kind of the very pro-liquidity move. So it'd probably be very good for asset prices. Around the margins, it probably would be inflationary. If gold goes up a ton, other metals could follow suit. Some of those have utility purposes, which could then make the things they go into more expensive. Combined with all this liquidity that's now sloshing around the system. That is something that they can do, but it's basically a way of devaluing the debt and running it hot. And that's kind of, instead of doing it by 6 to 7% a year, like the deficit numbers we have, that's kind of like pulling the Band-Aid off and getting a lot done at once. With the challenging part being that there's still no plan in place to then fix the bleeding going forward. So, for example, if we look back at World War II, they obviously had huge deficits, huge inflation, but then part of the way they got out of it in two main ways together. One, they did inflate a lot of it away. So if you were holding bonds or cash, you just compared to everything else you could have owned, you got devalued. You paid for it. But then two, they grew out of it while doing austerity as well. So it was like basically the inflation was a type of default. Not a nominal default, but it's a purchasing power default. So they said, okay, we're basically defaulting on a big percentage of our existing liabilities, but then we are going to more or less balance our budget for, the next generation. That's kind of what they did. And so if they just do the devaluation, but then they don't, fix the actual ongoing deficit leakage, that's more like an emerging market at that point. If they focus everything on trying to fix the leakage, but then they still have this big, debt pile that's not been sufficiently, kind of defaulted on or devalued, then there's still risk for, that still lies ahead.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like that 1-2 punch happens. We've already seen a partial bond devaluation, like the past 5 years, 6 years have been awful for bond and cash holders relative to practically every other asset class.
Yeah.
I just don't think it's done yet, basically. I don't think the next 5 years maybe will be as significant in that regard as those 5-6 years were. But it's not as though we've kind of completed that full cycle and are back to some sort of sustainable baseline.
When it comes to Bitcoin, Lyn Alden describes herself as a bearish bull. She maintains conservative bullish targets, believing Bitcoin will continue to outperform over time, but she cautions against overly euphoric expectations. One of her core views is that gold and Bitcoin complement each other. They don't always perform well at the same time. Sometimes gold leads, sometimes Bitcoin. Gold has the advantage of size and centuries of credibility, while Bitcoin represents technological innovation and higher upside potential. At this moment, Alden believes Bitcoin is in a healthier position for the next 6 to 12 months. The excessive froth from overvalued companies and speculative hype has washed out, leaving stronger fundamentals in place. With the Federal Reserve softening its stance and liquidity conditions improving, Bitcoin may regain momentum relative to gold in the short term.
part of why I've not been that disappointed is because I've been more in the, I sometimes describe myself as like a bearish bull on Bitcoin. I try to always have conservative bullish targets, which is that, it's like I'm always like, I think it's going to outperform things, but I don't think it's going to the moon anytime soon. And we can talk about why that is, but part of the reason I like to hold both is because they don't always perform well at the same time. Sometimes Bitcoin gets ahead of itself. Sometimes gold gets ahead of itself.
Right now it's gold.
Yeah, gold's the larger asset by a factor of about 10. A lot of the biggest pools of capital still understand it better than Bitcoin. Bitcoin's viewed more as like a tech play, something that has to do homework on to figure out. Whereas gold is, been around for a while. I sometimes I get a little concerned around Bitcoin getting ahead of its skis. Other times I get a little concerned around gold getting ahead of its skis. Right now, gold, just by more metrics, is kind of sentiment overbought. Even though I still think the long-term case for it is good. But over the next 6-12 months, I put my vote for Bitcoin. I think that kind of that rotation, and I could be wrong in this. Maybe we look back 6-12 months from now and maybe gold still outperformed again. But my guess would be Bitcoin is probably going to take over for a while. I think partially we had to see some of the MNAVs, like overvalued MNAVs of treasury companies, deflate to some extent. Once we saw like altcoin treasury companies coming to market, basically at that point, you just kind of have to expect there's going to be a washout to kind of get the kind of tourists out of the system, both in Bitcoin and around Bitcoin. But then that allows for a platform to rebuild from. And now that we see the Fed getting a little bit more dovish, we've seen some of that kind of already get washed out. I think Bitcoin's in a better place for the next 6-12 months. Going forward would be my base case. The only one that I've ever owned is MicroStrategy. I would own MetaPlanet in certain valuations. So I've been watching that one now that it's come down. I think that one's very well managed. I think those are kind of the two cream of the crop that are out there. I think what makes a good one is that you generally want to be the liquidity leader in your market. So in the US, that's MicroStrategy. In Japan, that's MetaPlanet. There are other opportunities for other big capital markets as well. I think the market's made it clear that if one is unprofitable, they tend to put a pretty big discount on that, just because they view it as a liability to the longer term Bitcoin strategy. In addition, if you're the third, fourth, fifth, sixth most liquid one at what you're doing, it's just challenging. Now, that's where they can add differentiation. If one has cash flows, they can kind of market that and say we're a hybrid entity. We have this other business that's not Bitcoin, and so you can kind of put the two together and they can balance out each other's risk. So they have to kind of explore what's going to work for the market. But I do think it's healthy that a lot of this was washed out, just because whenever something starts to look like free money, that's when more entities are going to come in. That's when you're going to get, like I said, there were like altcoin treasury companies coming to market. It kind of needed a reset. I still think the model makes sense, which is, and there's a couple of different models here. One is the pure play. I think that one, it really helps to be a leader in your market, kind of the one of the top two or so. But then there's a long tail of just any company, if they want, if you're selling, whatever the case may be, to have Bitcoin on your balance sheet, and make, some sense of that. So I think that's still a long-term strategy. And I think that we're in a healthier spot now that some of this has been kind of, the froth has been reduced.
So over the next year, what would you say you're feeling the most bullish about? And then what gives you a little bit more concern?
I think Bitcoin's in a good space for the next 12 months. I think we've seen a decent amount of washout. So just unlevered, self-custodial Bitcoin is, I think, in a great space right now. Some of the better treasury companies that are either cash flow neutral or positive and their MNAVs have come down a lot. I think that's been somewhat de-risked, especially if the ones that also have pretty low leverage. I think those are in decent shape. Gold I like longer term, but the value investor in me is a little bit, it came up pretty high pretty fast.
Yeah.
I started warning about that back in April, and it did this pretty long consolidation. It recently just broke out of it. So I got a little bit more kind of bullish again, but it's still just a little frothy. We'll see.
Okay.
I've been emerging markets are one of the areas that, I've actually kind of liked, or at least select emerging markets. It was kind of off people's radar. But it's something that, I've been pretty bullish on, and I still kind of continue to be probably for the next 12 months or so. I still think there's kind of room in the cycle for that. But I do think that probably unlevered Bitcoin is in a pretty good space right now. Potentially AI CapEx. That's been one of the few kind of really strong areas of the economy for reasons that I'm sure listeners know. But even that can get over its skis temporarily. And because of the sheer scale of it, even that contracting 10% or so, or just going flat for a year, could be pretty big. So I think just the AI flywheel, just taking a breather is something, or at least the potential for it is something I'm watching. I also think that residential real estate, I've been in the camp that it is kind of in a sideways pattern. So there's been the bear camp, which has argued that because of these now structurally higher rates, we talked about earlier, like I don't think mortgage rates are hitting a new low. The bear camp is basically saying that because of that, these inflated prices are going to just crash. My view has generally been that nationwide average, so obviously real estate is a very local market, but nationwide average, not going to be amazing performance in residential real estate, but that because of the fiscal dominant environment, that it's kind of levitate longer than people think, and that you can work that out through time rather than price. So there's two main types of corrections that can happen. Obviously, you can get over your skis and you can come back down in price, or you can get over your skis and you can go sideways, and you can chop along sideways in 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. You could even go sideways to up, but at a slower rate than other asset classes. So it's another way, and that's a kind of a way of correcting over time. And when you look at charts like residential real estate prices compared to wages, and they say, well, this delta got really big, it has to collapse. It's like, well, it could be the prices come down, or it could be the prices go sideways and nominal wages keep going up. And with inflation, I mean, they're not necessarily like actual wage increases, but just with inflation, and they kind of meet in the middle 5 years from now. And that's been more my camp, because if you have a more disinflationary or deflationary bust, that's one thing. The hurdle for that happening under a fiscally dominant environment is just much higher. So for 2-3 years now, I've been in the sideways real estate camp, and that's, we've been in the sideways to up process, or like inflation adjusted has been roughly sideways. I think that's probably going to continue. So it's not when you factor in maintenance, when you factor in insurance, when you factor in if you do buy it on mortgage, the expense of doing so, real estate's not my favorite nationwide average market right now.
Sure.
But that's different than saying that I expect it to just, crash or anything.
Beyond gold and Bitcoin, Alden also touches on real estate and emerging markets. For real estate, she rejects the extreme bearish calls for a crash, but also doesn't see major upside. Instead, she anticipates a sideways correction where prices don't collapse but gradually normalize through time as wages and inflation catch up. On emerging markets, she remains selectively bullish, especially in regions that are undervalued and overlooked by mainstream investors. These areas may provide surprising opportunities in the next cycle.
That's it for today's look into BTC Insight. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay on top of all the latest insights. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we'll catch you in the next one.